Hello and welcome to All for Women's Football. We are back again, as is the WSL. Football in general, everywhere you look, whether you go to Scotland, whether you go to Wales, whether you go to America, everywhere you travel, football is there. It's just what we want, isn't it? Football is back. It's so bad, we don't even know where to start. So we've gone literally with the WSL. But fear ye not. It's going to be the start of an epic year-long journey around the globe as we really start to check out everything here on All for Women's Football. Let's get into it, shall we? Yes, hello. It is All for Women's Football. We are back. And my goodness, it's a day of celebration, joy, and all sorts of things because we are genuinely shocked here at All for Women's Football. It takes a lot, as the famous chants go. We've seen it all, we've done the lot, but what we didn't expect to do was to be part of the FCA's 9 months into our existence. It's quite a thing. And we want to give a big thank you to all of you who have been on the ride from the very, very start. Just to be nominated genuinely feels like we have won something. And so we're quite content. We're very happy. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go and vote for us. If you've got a chance, feel free. It would be quite nice to finish higher than 12th or whatever it is there. But it is good to be in the chat. And we are genuinely thankful that the work we're trying to put in has been noticed. So a little round of applause there for Laura and Connor and, of course, Mia and Meg as well, who were there from the start. Absolutely superb. Don't bother clapping me. I do very little indeed. But we're in a bit of an interesting situation because out of those 12 people, we've got another person here today, just below us from the halfway line. And they're also nominated as well. Beth, you must be feeling quite excited and happy about that as well.
Definitely, yeah. I think similar to what you said there. The halfway line hasn't existed for very long. Jamie started it back close to the beginning of this year. So yeah, for our team to be in the mix of all of these brilliant people is something we're all so proud of, and really excited to be in the mix.
Now, I'm delighted for you. I genuinely am. I think it's really good. And again, it's nice to see how these young shows and these young WOFO channels are doing. There's lots of you thinking I've forgotten Jess. I haven't forgotten Jess. But Jess works incredibly hard, especially behind the scenes. Every graphic you see, like 98% of them have been made by Jess. And Jess would have been the first name that I mentioned today. But spot the mistake. It also features the Women's Championship. So, unfortunately, I read that and I was like, oh, Jess has done us like a kipper there, bless her. She was working incredibly hard today, but honestly, the work that Jess does, absolutely superb, and the channel would really struggle without her as well, and she keeps us motivated. So, yes, didn't really leave Jess out. Just wanted to make sure we poked a little bit of fun at her as well. Right, now that's done, we've got the jolly joys out of the way. Let's get to the WSL because, let's be honest, we are here to talk about the footy. And my goodness, it's a weekend. It's been absolutely superb. We're going to run through all of the games. We thought that would be a nice one. So we're going to start on Friday, if you can remember that far back. It was a nice Friday evening. BBC got loaded up onto your television screens where we were expecting to see Chelsea demolish Aston Villa. But Laura, that's not quite what we saw, was it? It was a reasonably dominant performance, especially from the first half from Chelsea. They did get the goal, but after that, Aston Villa really didn't sink in the manner that perhaps some people might have thought they would.
No, absolutely not. I think I predicted this one on the little predictions league as a lot of heavier defeat. I think last season's Aston Villa obviously had that dip from what was a really good season the season before, and there's always that element of uncertainty when you get a new manager. Don't know, I might not have pronounced that correctly, coming in and obviously taking over at Villa, which is always going to, I think you can cut a team some slack when they're in that transition period anyway. But yeah, they came out and they really competed with Chelsea. And don't we all want D'Angelo's header at the end to have gone in? Because what a moment that would have been. It would have been like Agent Idewell on it, sending off his Arsenal players to really destroy Chelsea's title hopes from the outset. But no, I think both teams played reasonably well. I always think the opening weekend is like teams are still a little bit rusty, still coming off that kind of pre-season. So you're not ever going to see a team full strength, but really, really impressed by Villa, as everyone's saying. I thought they were really secure defensively, and certainly at the end, it felt like they were pushing for a goal and Chelsea were the ones likely to concede, which against last season's champions, who, again, also in a period of transition with Bonpastor coming in, and you've got Niamh Charles out, which is also a consideration, and some changes in that team, well, a lot of changes in that team. So it'll be really interesting to see how both teams kind of develop, but it certainly feels really promising from Villa, and I'm sure Chelsea will also only get stronger.
Absolutely, Connor. I mean, apparently I've been already corrected. Sipoui here did not think that Chelsea were going to batter Aston Villa. How are you feeling about that? Because I had that, I think, down as a good 4 or 5-0. I didn't expect Aston Villa to really have enough, but they could have come out of that, as Laura says, with a good draw quite easily, had it not been for Hannah Hampton's acrobatic save and the width of a bar.
Yeah, I think I agree with Laura. I think this is first game of the season, just standard. You've seen Arsenal over the years dropping points in the first game of the season. United Villa last season, albeit United didn't have a great WSL campaign, that game was probably more in the favour of Villa. United won it, and then you look at the gap in terms of the league, in terms of the final table. So I think it's just an opening day. And I'm going to say this a few times, especially when we get to Brighton. Brighton Everton as well. I think it's just one of those where it's just the first day thing. I mean, from an outsider, I will say this. I'm glad that Richmond Canard is still on form and still firing, because I think there was an element of looking at that Chelsea front line, and it is going to be interesting when Fischel and Kerr and these kinds of players come back in, whether she's going to get as many minutes as she is currently getting, because she is an unbelievable footballer. It took her a while to settle really at Chelsea, and kind of midway through last season, going into the back end of the season, she really hit form. The goal is exceptional. She's an unbelievable footballer, and I'm glad, looking at Chelsea, she's still seen as kind of one of those players in that team. Now, whether that changes when certain players come back, I'm not too sure. But it's a nice problem to have. Villa were good enough, to stay in the game. I think if Villa were going to score at some point throughout the game, Chelsea probably would have still won anyway, because I think Chelsea would have just gone up another gear and won the game, because that's just what Chelsea do. But that header at the end was quite... That would have been the perfect opening day, especially being the first game of the weekend. That would have been quite something. But I think it's just a testament to the league as well. Like when you look at the league in terms of getting a little bit stronger with other teams, I think there will be a bit of a gap when you look towards the end of the season of like a top 4 and then a middle table and the bottom 3. Yeah, Chelsea did what they need to do. That Chelsea's ultimate aim is just to keep winning, these kinds of games. No matter how they do it, I don't think they're really that fussed. As long as they can keep ticking wins over, they'll be fine, obviously, for the title come the end of the season. So, yeah, I don't think they were exceptional, but as I said, I don't think any team really hits that. I've always said, actually, whichever team you support, for me, I always want to play the toughest games first, because you get them out of the way. 2, they've not settled yet. Now, you might not have settled either, but that's probably the best time to play Chelsea, because they've not fully settled yet. You don't really want to play Chelsea 7-8 games into a season when they've had their system settled, all the players are settled in and firing. I'd rather play them now and get them out of the way. So that's one ridiculously tough game off the calendar for Villa, and they showed good promise with it as well.
Good promise. Still didn't get the 3 points though, so it's one of those. No points for doing well at the end of the season, as we well know. Beth, for you, was it the Chelsea that you were expecting? Because Connor's right, isn't he? They weren't quite at their full firepower as you would expect, but then that's reasonable, isn't it? At the first game of the season, they're not quite going to be up to pace, but like a 100-meter runner, really. You know, they're never the fastest at the very beginning. They might react reasonably well, but it takes them a little while to get the pace up.
Yeah, look, exactly. I thought Villa were good. I thought Chelsea were good. 1-0 against the current title holders isn't bad, especially having come close to that, what would have been a crazy last-minute twist. I think, to touch on what Connor said about Canarid, I completely agree. I thought her goal was great, and if she hadn't scored that, it's Chelsea. I think it's very likely they would have found another way to make it happen. But I think she's a player with so much promise and so much potential. But in a squad like that, at times that can get a little bit lost. And it's very much down to, I believe, management, because having a squad where you've got that extensive of a list of talented, especially forwards, world-class forwards, that brings challenge in itself. Who do you start? What do you do when injured players come back? There's so many layers to it. So it was nice to see her kind of draw that attention to herself from the get-go of the season, and say, hey, you need me. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Obviously, it's only been the first game, so there's only so much that you can say, but it'll be interesting to see how Sonia Bonpasta does deal with that whole, like, it's a whole conversation in itself, the amount of like high quality that Chelsea have. But yeah, from Villa perspective, I wouldn't be at all disappointed. 1-0 is not a bad result. As you said, you don't get any points for not winning, but it definitely could have been worse, especially when you think about the fact that they too were in, as you said, a transitional period and did have some really difficult moments last season. So yeah, if I were a Villa fan, I definitely wouldn't be unhappy with that.
Absolutely. Can't disagree with anything they've said so far. This is why we love these panel shows, because these guys speak a lot of sense. Let's see if that will continue. And we're going to go to Laura again with the match of the weekend, obviously. Manchester United 3, West Ham United 0. Jays, Leah Galton and Super Grace Clinton scoring the goals there. I've got to be honest, Laura, I did think Man United might win that game by a little bit more than they did. But what were your thoughts of how United have started off? It's again, potential banana skin, but problem crisis averted there.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a banana skin you can say West Ham are. I think if you're, as Arsenal discovered last season, if you're losing those games, you're probably struggling, particularly at home. But then it is that kind of opening day of the season, which is a banana skin itself, I guess. I was quite happy. I did predict 3-0 for this game, so that made me very happy. But aside from that, I think it's a tough one, because I think maybe 2-3 matches into the season and West Ham are losing by more in that game, but you're still getting those connections across the pitch. You're still getting used to the changing system that they're playing. And all those different factors for United that I think, like, even just being clinical doesn't necessarily come on the first day of the season. And we saw them hit the bar. So I think maybe a couple of games later, but West Ham looked poor, I thought. I don't think they didn't impress at all. They just kind of, it felt very much like it was United dominating for large periods in that match, and just almost West Ham really, really just hanging on in there and kind of sitting back. It didn't get forward all too often. I thought when a couple of instances when West Ham got forward, I thought maybe they can do something, and then they just really couldn't. They couldn't complete those moves. And yeah, to me, I was kind of, to be honest, I was switching between the Brighton game and the United West Ham game, which in terms of analysis is not the best, because it meant that everything was kind of broken up and I didn't actually get to see the flow of the game. But it felt to me very much like United were dominating. They could have been more clinical, and I thought they were probably settling into a new system a little bit more in terms of creating those chances and creating those connections. But there was elements of promise in the United team. But West Ham, I didn't see anything there that I was like, you know what, against maybe a mid-table side, they could really build on that. It just felt like they have a good goalkeeper, and that was probably my only positive from that West Ham performance.
Absolutely. Fair enough. Sapphire's obviously on the wrong show. I'm sure that was on our other channel. All I can say to you, Sapphire, is that is within my power. But if for some reason I fail, please don't go and just stay another day. Connor, what might you be thinking with regards to the Man United? I know that if people want to hear your thoughts, they can go over to Wolf United WFC. But on a truncated opinion, you don't really get the chance to give too much of an opinion because you're too busy listening to me and Charlie all the time. What was your thoughts on the United game?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, when we did the preview show last week, I said West Ham will go down. I still stand by that. That nothing I saw on Saturday convinced me any otherwise. I do fear for him. I just don't think losing a player like Sissoko at the back, I think, is a big loss for them. They look a bit all over the place. I mean, you only have to look at their third goal. It's good movement from Turlin to drag the defender away, but Clinton's got about 3 or 4 yards either side of her, completely open in the middle. I would worry if I was a West Ham fan. I think, don't get me wrong, obviously we can talk about Palace in a little bit. They didn't exactly do much better either, but I just don't think West Ham are going to have enough this year to do it. As I said, they've been kind of like flirting on relegation for a while, and eventually you will go down. You can't keep doing that forever. I just said this on the last show we were just on. From a United point of view, I thought it was good. It was nothing exceptional. It wasn't bad. It was good. And I said this on the show last week that United had implemented a new system for this season. And obviously we saw that over the weekend. And I think it's intriguing. I think we're seeing that evolution in the WSL that, you go back 3-4 years, pretty much everyone played the same. It was the same kind of system, the one up top and keeping it out with the kind of high wingers. United are really going for this kind of unorthodox approach, which, like I said, is kind of a 3 at the back with 2 inverted wingers. It's very, very attacking, and I'm intrigued to see how this plays out throughout the season. Because as I said, I think United are going to score a lot of goals, but United might get caught on the break a lot. United are probably going to be one of the most exciting teams to watch this year because a lot of games are probably going to be like 3-2 and 4-2 and 4-3 and things like that because United are going to be on the front foot a lot, but equally you're going to give up a lot of chance at the other end because that's just going to happen when you're playing a system like that. So yeah, I'm intrigued, like I said, but I do fear for West Ham. And they've got some good forwards. Oeki and Asai are brilliant. But if you can't get the ball to them, they're pretty redundant up there.
Absolutely. Sean Zayn sounds very Football Manager with this new United system. If you want to find out more about it and indeed read more of Connor's ideas, you can go on to the Cutback, which is a rather wonderful new thing as well. Nice and new and shiny. We like that. So do feel free to go and look at that. There's a couple other people as well writing on that. I think it's a Substack. And so there are other clubs available. You won't just have to read Connor's musings on United. Beth, the game for you, did it pretty much pan out the way you expected it to?
Yeah, I'm going to slightly contradict myself here because I know I said Chelsea Villa, it's the first game of the season, there's only so much you can say, but I really do think, like you guys have touched on, West Ham are in trouble. They just looked so poor. You just can't be giving players like Grace Clinton that much space. You just can't do it. And there's just a sense of like a little bit of disorganization, like on and off the pitch, I think. And as was mentioned before, when you're just kind of floating down that end of the table, it's going to go one way or the other. And when it doesn't seem like there's that much drive to make it go the right way, it's going to go the wrong way for them instead. So we'll see. But as Laura said, it didn't even look like, okay, well, they're playing a good United side. Let's give them, cut them a bit of slack. It just looked like they were quite lost. Some good goalkeeping. And obviously they are playing against players like Jace who looked so determined. I think that's something to say about United. There really looks to be a lot of determination in that squad, especially going forward to just make it work. But the defenders with the Jace goal, for example, just almost asleep, it seemed. So yeah, not a great start for West Ham at all. But I think it will be interested to see what United do with that system, and how that goes against teams that maybe are a bit more defensively organised.
Again, 3 very reasonable ones. Of course, Brighton managed to beat Everton 4-0. We don't really need to talk about that, do we, Sean? So just move on to... I'm joking, of course. I'm not going to move on. But Sipoui said again, all the teams that lost by 3 or more goals of the relegation contenders could go down to goal difference too. I've got to be honest, and I don't say this in terms of being sarcastic or anything like that, but I genuinely didn't expect Brighton 4, Everton 0. Obviously, Manchester United were top of the table for a very brief moment, and then of course Brighton saw it and went, "Oh, we'll have that. We'll take top." I don't think any of us saw Brighton being top of the table at the end of game week 1, but what a performance that was from Kiko Seiki to score that hat trick as well, and it was a blinking good one as well. Every single goal was just superb. And of course, Fran Kirby from the penalty spot as well, with a rather nonchalant penalty. I have to be honest, if the goalkeeper goes the right way there, you would imagine that being saved. But again, a brilliant game. What did you make of the Brighton Everton game? Because Everton do look, I think, as well in trouble there.
It's just to me, yeah. I'll go for it. I think, yeah. I mean, it was a brilliant performance from Brighton, wasn't it? And especially the individual performance of Sieke there for a debut to go so well. You can't dream of anything better. We talk about players struggling to settle, and that's just not happened here and gone straight full steam ahead. And let's hope that carries on for her, because I also think it's like the hype was all around Fran Kirby and Nikita Paris, and then to do that and kind of push yourself through in that way was brilliant. But yeah, I think Everton certainly looked shaky, and I think a couple of the goals obviously came from errors. The first, or was it the second Sieke goal first goal, sorry. She won the ball back off the Everton defender, Brosnan fuming. And she was just left in acres of space. So I think Everton certainly look like they're potentially struggling, not many resources, and it'll be interesting. There's obviously news of a takeover, I think, today, and that might shape, the women's team, how that goes. I'm not sure whether they will then get more investment. But yeah, I think as Sean just mentioned, the Ghali injury is another knock, another blow for an already pretty strung out squad. So I think it certainly worries. I read as well that there is a record 8th consecutive opening day defeat for Everton. So there's also that aspect of they don't do well on opening day, but they've survived before. And I hope that Everton do survive, because I think they do have some really quality players. And Sorensen seems like a good manager and just doesn't necessarily have the resources. So I think it's a really tough defeat for them, and certainly a lot of lessons to learn from. But you also came up against a really, really strong individual performance from Sieke, and then a Brighton team who look really good. And I think that'll be interesting to see how they fare against potentially better and more well-organised opposition, and whether they can implement that in the rest of the season.
Absolutely. I tend to agree. And TJ, absolutely, first time in the WSL that a hat-trick has been scored on debut, which is quite a thing. Connor, obviously you wouldn't have caught too much of this match, what with the fact that you were probably just getting out of Old Trafford as all of that was going on. But I imagine you heard a little bit of it on the radio and what was going on around it. That's a heck of a result for Brighton, isn't it? When you consider they lost Elizabeth Turland in the summer transfer window. I have to be honest, in my prediction, I went for Everton. I didn't really think it through. And it was only when I was watching the game that I realised I'd absolutely mucked it up, because they have got some really good players this season. They're looking like a side that could cause a bit of bother throughout the season.
Yes, to a point. Sorry, Sean, you're not going to like this. I don't think Brighton were exceptional to a point. I just think Everton were that bad, and there's a reason I put them kind of near the bottom. As I said, I think it'll be a bottom three of West Ham, Everton, and Palace. It doesn't help with Everton because someone's referenced it, and I know it's two different teams with the men's and the women's, but when you've got the whole club in disarray and negativity all around you, that will feed through to the women's players as well, and obviously the coaching set up there as well. It doesn't help, when you've got all of that going on above you. So I think West Ham have got a decent enough squad. I don't think it's incredibly poor, but it's certainly not, incredible. So I thought Brighton would win. I thought I probably would have gone for like 2-0 or something like that. I didn't think it'd win by the margin it did. But again, it's just kind of, as Laura just mentioned, all the headlines were going to be about Kirby and Paris and these kinds of players, and it wasn't. Kiko kind of took that away, which is obviously credit to her as well. So I think Brighton will be decent enough. I think I put them 8th in my prediction. I think they'll be there or thereabouts in kind of mid-table. I'm not going to get too carried away by the fact they scored 4 on the opener. Last season United beat West Ham 5-0. I'm pretty sure the week before drew to Leicester. So in terms of the WSL, you do get big results like this and then lose the week after. So it can happen. They were good. Brighton, but I don't think they were exceptional. But again, as I just said for West Ham, I would equally worry for Everton because not just the position they're in, not just because of this game, just because I don't see where they can get wins. They will get wins, but I think until that whole club is kind of sorted from the top down, I think they're going to be there or thereabouts near the bottom every season until they sort all of that out.
As long as it's not next week, Connor, they can get all the points they want. That's not a problem at all. Beth, for you, again, the general consensus, Everton are going to be in a bit of trouble. But again, Brighton doing really well. And your thoughts on the penalty, because a few people have sort of mentioned that as well. It was nice for Frank Kirby, I suppose, to score on debut. But yeah, a little bit cheeky, wasn't it, to someone that slow and that low?
Yeah, I thought the penalty itself was quite underwhelming. I guess maybe an element of I was going to say playing it safe, but I don't know if that is playing it safe. So not too much to say on that, but I think completely agree with what's been said so far. I think there's a general sense of respect for Brian Sorensen because I think it's fair to say that we all know he's a decent manager, but has just had the worst luck with outgoings, injuries, not to mention the whole what's going on with the wider club, which is so unfortunate, the knock-on effects that also has, but also kind of at this point quite unavoidable. And there really is only so much that he can do about that. And it is going to take time if they're going to be able to work their way up again. I'm reasonably confident that they'll do enough to stay up. I don't have them necessarily in my kind of relegation pick, but I do think that it's not going to be easy, especially against the top teams when you've got injuries like Gally now to add to all of the kind of struggles. But yeah, I thought Brighton were good. I think their recruitment this window was great. Obviously, really just solo excellence from CK. But yeah, I wasn't amazed, but I thought they were good. And it was a surprising result. I'm not saying I had Everton to win, but I definitely didn't have them to lose 4-0. So yeah, again, see how they go. I think Brighton could do really well if they kind of keep on this trajectory again. I know it's only been one game, but they did have a lot to show for themselves. So fair play to them for making the most of this transitional period. Another one with lots of new things, new people. But yeah, that was my thought, really.
Absolutely, Sean. So we never score 4, we never top. Dream stuff indeed. Enjoy the ride, Sean. So I don't think it's going to last too much longer in terms of still being top, because there's some other teams that will be knocking on the door. And simply way I would say there was a vicious rumour the last time she was on that it could have been Sunderland. but we will never know because it's really irrelevant for the purposes of our conversation. Now, we're going to go to the obvious big game of Sunday as Arsenal drew with Manchester City. Obviously, Freedom Arnhem scoring for Arsenal to open the goal scoring fest. And then, of course, Man City switched the game, put it on its head as Viv Miedema scored once again, but this time for Manchester City. Jess Park putting City ahead before Beth Mead, in the last 10 minutes, managed to level up. I've got to be honest, I was talking to a few of my friends on a personal and team supporting point of view. This was the result that I was hoping for and was a bit of a delight. Laura, I imagine that for you, the best part of this game was seeing Viv Miedema score.
Right in front of me. Yeah. No, I've never been this anxious for a game because I just didn't know which way it was going to go. And I think the midweek matches of City winning 5-0, Arsenal losing to Häcken were kind of in my mind of, I don't think Arsenal played that well necessarily in the qualifiers. Obviously, they had a pretty good result against Rangers, but we weren't seeing them at their best and certainly not most clinical against Häcken. City looked really good again. Well, they got a really good result against Paris, which isn't an easy thing. So coming into this match, I was very, very nervous. And I think there was this sense that in my head that Arsenal could really lose badly here. So the end result, if you told me that at the start of the day, I'd have probably been quite happy with. But I think by the end of the match, it felt like Arsenal should have won it. They had the more opportunities for the majority of the match. I'd say they were the better team. There was a period in the second half where I think City kind of looked a little bit more dominant. But yeah, Arsenal had so many chances. The Ford goal was onside, but those decisions happen throughout the season. And Blackstenius and Russo both should have scored their chances too. So I think, I don't think it's going to cost them. I think that's really overreactive in terms of what did we see last season from teams against the big teams. Chelsea lost to Arsenal, Man City lost both times to Arsenal and still finished above Arsenal. I think we overhype the big games this early on in the season sometimes and read too much into them and go, this is going to cost them. And obviously we could look back on this and say, yeah, that's where we dropped those 2 points. But I think if this is 2 points comes down to it, we've probably not been good enough across the rest of the season. I think on the opening day, it's really tough. It's like you come away from it and you go, I think it's fine, because I think for Arsenal, the key thing was not to lose and not to lose heavily, because you're going into this really pivotal match of Champions League qualifiers, which we'll come on to. And psychologically, you want to have put in a good performance, which they did do. Obviously, I also thought that the City goals, that Jess Park goal doesn't happen most chances, 9 times out of 10, she doesn't score that goal. And it was brilliant. And she's obviously a brilliant player. And then the Miedema one takes a huge deflection. She manages to kind of squirm through Little's legs and Lotte Wubben-Moy's legs, which Little's normally 10 times better at keeping the ball than that. And it just felt really messy. It was just that kind of like back and forth pinball effect, and then takes a huge deflection off Kadina. So I think both City's goals kind of came from like things that don't necessarily happen that often. But I think for me, the key takeaways were that City weren't quite to their best in that match and were maybe a little bit shaken by first day at the Emirates, and Arsenal need to be more clinical going forward. And that's a problem that's kind of plagued them throughout last season as well. So I think Arsenal will be make and break on whether they can fix that problem or not.
Interesting. I mean, kind of for you, that's a point, obviously. Is that a good point for both sides? Would you think that either one of those sides would have been thinking they should have taken the 3 points going into the game? I've got to be honest, I think if you are going to be challenging for the top this season, that's where you kind of need to pick up your draws, and you need to be winning the games against the other sort of 7 or 8 teams within the league. What would you make of that?
It depends what either side's ambitions are. If Arsenal's ambition is to go for the title, They should probably be looking to win games like that. If it's top 3, that's a very good point. Because I always look at it, if you're going for the title, especially in that mini league against the kind of top 3, top 4, you win your home, don't lose your away, is kind of how I've always looked at it from that point of view. So obviously Arsenal being the home side, if they're going for the title, I would, like if that's United, for example, I would be looking to win that if you're pushing for the title. But as I said, top 3, it's a good point. From City's point of view, it'd be the same kind of thing. They didn't lose away from home. That's a good point for them. They will feel it's 2 points drop because of how late the equaliser came in terms of the 80th minute or so. I know obviously there was talk about the Ford offside goal or non-goal, whatever you want to call it, or that moment. Equally, you could argue a potential foul in the Arsenal one. So, I mean, these games are always riddled with these kind of moments and talking points at the end of the game. I wish they weren't, because I'd rather be talking about the actual what we see on the pitch than those, because they kind of overshadow it sometimes. But it was a good game. I think it was a good indicator in terms of where both teams are. Am I going to say this or not? You know what? It wound me up a little bit, actually, the narrative going into the game, because it was all around stuff that was not happening on the pitch. So all of the Sky did a thing with Miedemar, and all of the questions pretty much were about her personal life and stuff away from the game, rather than actually focusing on what's going to happen on the pitch. It was more about, Mead versus Miedemar, and all this kind of stuff, the Miedemar return, rather than actually focusing on what the game is going to bring and what we saw. And we saw this post game as well. I don't know, that annoyed me, because I'd rather talk about what we actually saw on the pitch. City just intrigued me, because you've got Miedemar and Shaw and trying to fit them both in. I thought there was times when they kind of get in each other's way a little bit, because they're kind of both looking to play in that same position. And Jess Park was the player that I fear is going to have her development hampered a bit because of the players that the City have got there. You're not going to leave Miedemar or Shaw out. Jill Ward is not far from return, and you would imagine she's going to come in and take that starting spot off her. So it intrigues me. City intrigued me into how they're going to set this up over a full season. They've already qualified for the Champions League. I know not officially, but they're not going to lose that many goals in a second leg. Yeah, I don't know. I think I said on the show last week, City's weakness is going to be their backline, and whether I think the one injury to that backline, they're in trouble. So I don't know. I think that's probably a fair result. I think both teams will be relatively happy, to be honest.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Beth kind of there saying just straight up, no, that really wound me up the way it was marketed. But by the same token, I know that if I was marketing this game, I'd have focused on the fact that Viv Miedemar was coming back to play her first game for Manchester City against their old side, Arsenal. And, I mean, there's always that air of inevitability, isn't there, that when you have someone who's a bit of a legend who plays incredibly well for you, like your worst nightmare is that they're going to turn up and score a goal against you. And she did. And so you can kind of see why there was a bit of marketing around that. Do you agree with Connor in that respect, or do you think it's maybe a bit disrespectful to two of the, the top teams in the division?
I think that the narrative of Miedemar coming back to play against her old club was always going to be the narrative. The fact that it was the first game of the season and that it was obviously at the Emirates, even more so. I think the veering into making it more about her personal life is a separate conversation. But I think the narrative of her visiting her old club itself is quite inevitable. As for the game itself, I think both of these teams, both Arsenal and City, are teams that, with the squads they have, should be competing for the title. But I think neither will be too disappointed with a draw, especially City, maybe given how the game started. Jess Park's goal was unbelievable. There's no saving that. I thought Zinsberger, on that note, had a good game. She made some really good saves. There were points where she, really made that massive difference for Arsenal. So fair play to her. Definitely wanted to make sure I mentioned that. I think Arsenal were wasteful and will regret that, as they always seem to. And it sounds silly to say that, because I think it is a bit, as Laura said, overreactive to say like Arsenal's forwards are underperforming this early on in the season. But I think it's something that we saw happening last season and saw happen against BK Häcken earlier in the week. So for Stina Blackstenius, Alessia Russo to miss those one-on-one chances, I know it happens, but it's not, if you're an Arsenal fan, it's not quite good enough because in that City game, they could have been well ahead before probably either of those City goals happened. The Jess Park one, like, fair play. There's not a lot to be done about that, I don't think. But the Miedema one, it was a poor turnover. The deflection was really, really unfortunate. And yeah, they obviously got back into it and got their draw. But it would be, I don't think it would feel as relieving to have that point as it would have if the game had just gone differently, because the point itself isn't a bad result, but to miss out on 3 because you didn't put away chances is, I think the issue there. So yeah, I think City were also good. As I said, like, these are 2 teams that should both be in the running for the title. But I agree with what Laura was saying. I think that obviously both would have loved a win in this instance, but just beating the top teams isn't what wins you the title. It's everything in between as well. Like things like when Arsenal lost to West Ham last season, like that was huge for their campaign. So I think, yeah, I don't think Arsenal fans should be panicking too much just based on that. It didn't lose by any dramatic margin. And City will, as was touched on, be really interesting to see what happens when, for example, Joe Rourke comes back, because they have such quality going forward. However, as Connor mentioned, one injury at the back and they could have some problems. Yeah, the depth is unbalanced, I would say, for Gareth Taylor. So we'll see, but yeah, those are my thoughts.
I think Beth makes some interesting points. I just wanted to pick up on what Sean said here, because this is the narrative. It seems like every time Arsenal lose or concede a goal, it's always Zinsberger's fault. And I wanted to highlight this because I can't lie, I don't think there's much she can do with either of them, you know, with the deflection and with the second one. And both times when they went in, I look on Twitter and the same narrative. Oh, why? You know, she's just stood there. She's not getting. What's she supposed to do? The first one's a massive deflection. She's already moved to the left, so there's no. What's she going to die for the cameras? And the second one, you're not saving that, so it's completely pointless. They're moving for that anyway. And I just feel like, as Sean said there, the defense. If you're getting that close to goal, granted both of them were kind of outside the box deflection and the one off the bar, obviously from Park. Something's gone wrong elsewhere. It's not always the keeper's fault. You're either your forwards haven't pressed correctly, your midfield's giving the ball away or haven't pressed correctly, and your backline haven't blocked the shot. Something's happened elsewhere for it to get that far in the first place. So I don't know. I feel, don't get me wrong, do I think she's an absolute world-class keeper? No, she's not. But she's not the root of every single Arsenal goal, which is what the narrative seems to be every time Arsenal score. And I think it's a bit harsh, to be honest. But like I said, that's not me saying she's an elite goalkeeper. I don't think she is, but I do think she gets unfairly blamed every time Arsenal score. So that's why I just wanted to highlight that one.
Yeah.
Oh, go on. Do you have more to add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I couldn't agree more. And I think, especially with the Jess Park goal, that was just a screamer. Nobody is saving that, I don't think. And the other one, if it hadn't taken the deflection, I don't know if it was going in. Like maybe it was, but I'm not convinced. So yeah, I think it's unfair and also a little bit short-sighted to put the responsibility of both of those goals on the keeper when how many players are in front of her who have slipped up somewhere along the way.
There we go. So a little bit of defence there for Arsenal and their goalkeeper. Maybe she'll have a bit more defence. She wouldn't have conceded 2. Who knows? But there we go. Just a gag. Behave. Just trying to bring a bit of levity to the situation. Speaking of draws, though, Liverpool drew with Leicester. Laura, would you agree with me that that is a better point for Leicester than it is for Liverpool, based on the fact that Liverpool were fourth last season? That's the sort of game they're going to need to win if they want to emulate that same finish this season, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you're basing it on the fact that they want to replicate last season, it's absolutely a better point for Leicester than it is for Liverpool. That being said, I think Liverpool, kind of the performances they put in last season, were outperforming all the like stats that they had. They were outperforming their XG. They were outperforming like chances created on every kind of metric you look at for Liverpool last season. They had a phenomenal season, but they did overperform. So I think we shouldn't be necessarily surprised if they don't reach those heights again this season. And potentially we see that little bit of almost like the Aston Villa effect of having a really strong season, struggling to match it, and it looks like a decline, but actually it's in some ways cementing what they've been doing. And just, I mean, Aston Villa definitely had a drop off, but I think Liverpool dropping down the table won't necessarily be regression. It will just be kind of performing how they should have been performing last season. That sounds silly, but it's like, I don't think they can necessarily have to be much worse to do worse, if that makes sense, in terms of not getting those chances that maybe they got last season, not having those players that were being really clinical, having those like outperforming last season. So, and I do think, you know, Leicester are a decent outfit. They've not done badly over the past few seasons. So I don't think this is like a completely unexpected result. I have to say I didn't watch the game because I was stuck at King's Cross. My train got cancelled. So I can't say a lot on like the actual performances, but yeah, in terms of the expectation, if we're basing off the table last season, absolutely it feels like a drop off from Liverpool, but I don't think we should necessarily be that surprised. And I think, yeah, I'm excited to see how Olivia Smith does going forward, and Hogg obviously getting the header as expected.
Absolutely. I mean, Connor, the goals we mentioned, Sophie Hogg from Liverpool and Jutta Rantala from Leicester. That result for Leicester there, when you consider the fact we're talking about West Ham, we're talking about Everton, we're going to talk about Crystal Palace briefly in a moment. For Leicester, that will give them, I would imagine, some confidence into thinking they're not going to be in a similar sort of battle down the bottom as they were last season.
Yeah, I agree to a point. I think it's interesting with Liverpool because, yes, they finished fourth last season, but their record against teams near the bottom was actually quite poor. It was their record against the teams above them that kind of got them. I think they were third in the table against the top five, you know, above United and Arsenal, I think it was, in those games, because for some whatever reason, they just seemed to play better against the teams near the top than did the bottom. If they could have picked up points in these games last season, they would have been in the top three because their record against the top three was so good. The top five, if you include United and access 6 points that they got in that one. Sorry, United fans, we don't need to be reminded of that. Yeah, I think it's a good point for Leicester. I said on the previous show last week that I think Liverpool will drop off this year for the reasons Laura just mentioned, and also I just don't think they've strengthened the team. If anything, Olivia Smith is an exceptional signing, but the rest of them, I don't think that squad is any better than what it was last year. And eventually you get found out. Now, Roman Haga is a brilliant forward. Can she do what she did again last season? Probably. Yeah, she'll get similar kind of numbers, but I just don't, again, I go back to, I don't think that team is as good as it was last year. Do I think they're going to be near the bottom? No, I just think they're going to be that team that is kind of like the Spurs kind of bracket where they're kind of like 6th, 7th, you know, decent number of points, nowhere near relegation, but not near the top four. In Leicester's case, I think they'll be just shy of that. Lizzie Kopp obviously made a brilliant save. It's now pretty evident why Leicester wanted to keep hold of her from United bidding relentlessly throughout the window. And I'm intrigued, actually, from a Leicester point of view, why, now don't get me wrong, she pulled off an exceptional save, so she can't be doing that much wrong. But Janina Leipzig has almost fallen away as the Leicester number one. Now, this is a player I raved about before she even came to this country, and then when she came to Leicester, I thought she was the best keeper in the league. And I still stand by, I think she is definitely in that conversation. She can't get games anymore, which, I don't know, I find interesting. I'd love to speak to a Leicester fan about why that is. I know she had injuries and things like that, but She was on the bench, so she's fit. She's ready to play, but she's not the number one anymore. So I'm a little bit intrigued by that. So yeah, I think this is just that sounds really bad. I was going to say standard WSL. You know what I mean? Teams kind of in the mid-table, drawing, is probably about a fair result. So yeah, I don't think Liverpool are going to be near the top four again. So I think they'll be kind of mid-table-ish.
But equally, you made that sound like you don't think Leicester are going to be in a bottom 2 or 3.
No, I don't think Leicester. As I said, I think that bottom 3 of Everton, West Ham, and Palace will be detached from the ones above them.
There you go. So when he said I agree to a point, what you meant was I agree. Good, lovely. Just checking on that one. Okay, so Beth, for you, where did you sort of see that result on your spectrum of results? Because I did think Liverpool would win that.
Yeah, I agree. I thought Liverpool would win, not necessarily by any huge margin, because I think Leicester have a lot of promise. But Liverpool did do really well last season. And while I think it's fair to say that they probably did overperform a little bit, they are a good side with a good manager. However, their window was not the most inspiring over the summer. So I do think it will be difficult for them to maintain that. I think it's likely that we might see not necessarily a regression, but just maybe a bit of a plateau. Rantala for Leicester, unsurprisingly, really, really good. But I think they are going to need a little bit more if they're going to compete in maybe the top half of the table. I don't see them being too near the bottom, but they are going to need a little bit more, I think, to really raise any eyebrows as such. And I think Liverpool, similar to the conversation we were maybe saying about Arsenal before, just if they'd made the most of their chances, they probably would have won, despite Leicester putting in what I think was a good performance. So, yeah, I just thought that was worth mentioning as well.
Fair enough. And the last game, of course, of the WSL weekend was Tottenham Hotspur 4, Crystal Palace 0. Just a horrible day, really, if you're a Crystal Palace fan. You just made it up to the WSL. You go to that game full of joy. It's only in London. You've not had to travel too far. So you've had a nice away day to begin with. And then before long, Hayley Rasso, Jessica Naz, Drew Spence, Olga Artanen have gone and scored 4 goals against your team. And then just when you think it couldn't get any worse, Brooke Aspin gets the second yellow card in the 94th minute and is therefore off and suspended. Laura, we saw Spurs reach the FA Cup final last season. Their league form was patchy. This is, again, the joint best score of the weekend. You spoke a bit about, or certainly in the chat that we were speaking about with Man United and West Ham, was it a good Man United side or a poor West Ham side? Where do you think this rates? Is this a good Spurs side, or was it just a poor Crystal Palace side?
Again, I was stuck at King's Cross so suddenly and on a train, so sadly didn't get to watch much of this one to kind of say in particular. But from what it seems, and I mean those stats from Sean, it certainly feels like, you come up from the Championship and it sadly is a big gap. And we've seen that in terms of teams going yo-yoing. You saw Bristol last season. And I think it's a shame to see that's potentially still the case and that Crystal Palace are still definitely going to be battling that relegation. The only times I think we've seen that trend not happen is when we've seen teams, and I wish women's football wasn't this way, but it's when we've seen teams that have been strongly invested in by the men's side, and it's like, we are going to stay in the WSL and we're going to invest this amount of money to do so. So I think Leicester potentially are slightly different to that, but I think everyone else feels very much like that's been the case. So it will be a really interesting season to see how Palace push on. Obviously, they made a lot of signings and whether they can start to gel, because it's really tough when you make a lot of signings and you have a really high turnover. But from what I've read and kind of the highlights I've watched, it really just feel like they didn't click. I think Tottenham had 2 really good goals as well. 2 of those goals were absolute brilliant goals. And so, yeah, I think it's exciting for Tottenham, but I don't think you can necessarily read too much into it in terms of they were against a newly promoted side that are always going to struggle in a league that sadly feels a lot higher. But yeah, I think the Robert Villahan project does feel really exciting from a Spurs perspective, and it will be really exciting to see how that kind of progresses and whether they can be one of those teams to start kind of challenging that established top 3, top 4. But yeah, unfortunately, I've not had a chance to watch that one. So in terms of tactically, I probably can't give too much insight. But yeah, an interesting one to watch develop. And I do think we use the word Spursy sometimes. I do think it is quite funny that despite winning 4-0, they are still second on alphabetical order.
And I'm sure Sean is not even remotely fussed about that. Just an interesting little point that was brought up. Does anyone know when Aspen is serving a suspension, as the next game is against her parent club? My understanding of league rules, and I could be entirely wrong here, is that your suspension is from a game that you are eligible for. It doesn't necessarily mean through injury or anything like that. So my understanding would be that if she was ineligible to play in the next game through an agreement with her parent club, then the suspension would probably go after that, because she was never going to play that game anyway, and that would make it stupid. Therefore, it could well be the case that she does manage to miss that one, and we all just go, oh, how the stars are aligned. But yes, that would be my understanding. But I'm perfectly willing to be wrong on that one if somebody knows better. Connor, Spurs Crystal Palace, we saw Spurs live at the end of last season. They've added, Hayley Rasso there in that side is as well a very, very good striker, somebody who's certainly going to elevate the club. What was your thought about Spurs in this game? It's a brilliant result for them.
Yeah, I'd add Claire Hunt into that conversation as well. I think that was such a weird transfer when that kind of came out. I was just like, what, really? like I don't know. It's not a sign that I thought I'd see Spurs make, but yeah, like I said, you got to say it's with a pinch of salt. They are playing Crystal Palace, who I thought were pretty poor. In this, it's going to be tough for them. It goes back to what we said all along. The gap is far too big between the top end of the Championship and the WSL, and I stand by. I think they will just mute myself there. I think they will just stay up because I think West Ham will be worse. But it's important, I always find, for new signings to get off the market to go forward. So Rasso obviously hitting the ground running already. Spurs fans are already being like, Bizet who? She's moved on, and Rasso's already scoring for him. So I think from that point of view, it's good for her. Obviously, they kept a clean sheet as well. From Palace, obviously, they've got Chelsea next, so you would expect they're probably going to get beat pretty heavy next week. I don't know who they've got after that, but yeah, I worry for him a little bit, but I don't think it's too much. His first game, it's away at Spurs. I stand by. I think Villahan is one of the best managers in the league anyway. I think his ability to get the best out of players is what we're going to see again this season. I would think Spurs will go deep into competitions and be kind of in and around that mid-table, high mid-table. I think I'd put them fifth in my thing, obviously behind United, Arsenal, City, Chelsea. So I think they'll be happy with that. They'll be really happy with that. I don't know who Spurs have got next. I think they got Leicester, I want to say Villa away. So that'll be a good test, actually. Villa side that did well to at Chelsea. So yeah, Spurs are going to need to rack some points together, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're October. Yeah, it is. They're October, November. They've got Liverpool, United, Chelsea, City, and Arsenal. So it doesn't really get much tougher than that for them. So they probably need this next win, because after that, they've got probably the hardest run going. Good result for them.
Yep, I agree. Beth, anything you'd like to add on the Spurs Crystal Palace game?
I think there's a lot for Spurs to be excited about. As was said, Robert Villaham's a great manager. They've had some really big signings. I thought Palace goalkeeper Yanez was really good. I think she deserves credit where credit's due. Obviously a tough game, and not necessarily, I hope, an indication of how the rest of Palace's season will go. I know kind of we know how newly promoted teams struggle in the WSL due to the gap that there is from the Championship. But I hope that they can pick up some points as the season progresses. And as was touched on, 2 of those goals were really great for Spurs. Jess Naz is looking really exciting. And I thought Drew Spence was a big standout as well. I have only seen the highlights because I was at the Emirates for Her Football Hub covering the Arsenal City game. But yeah, I think obviously disappointing for Palace, but it wasn't an easy task by any means. So hopefully they can come back from it one way or another. But yeah, other than that, not too much to add to what's been already said, really.
Okay, well, we're going to stick with you just briefly, because obviously the last time we spoke to you, Beth, we were deep diving into the Championship and seeing what we were going to make of that. I just wondered if you could give us a sort of a brief couple of minutes of highlights that you have noticed in that opening 3 games of the Championship. Obviously, at the moment, Charlton top, 3 wins from 3 with a nice little win there against Durham 2-1, which, as we said before, is not an easy result to go and get when you are facing them. Did have that, I think they were at home though, so probably a little bit easier than if they're playing on that little pitch that reminds you a little bit of a racing track as well. That's a horse racing track. And also a school fair. It's a very interesting place, Darren. If you haven't been there, I'd recommend it for sure. It's definitely an experience. The bottom 3 teams, all on 0 points at the moment. Sheffield United yet to win, a loss against Newcastle 2-0. Your favourite team, Sunderland, on 2 games, but they have not won a game yet. And of course, Portsmouth losing to Birmingham 4-0. They're yet to get a point. What would you say would be the highlights or the key points that you would take out of the Championship season so far?
I think that Newcastle have cemented themselves really well in the sense of we're not going back down, which I think we probably all expected. But they're doing it so kind of with so much energy behind them, especially with players like Shania Hales just absolutely kind of taking the Championship by storm almost, really.
But anyone who watched, Shania Hales, not related to Barry Hales. We had it confirmed, didn't happen, not related. Just thought we'd throw that one out there because they did actually go and check for me. Over to you again, Beth.
Some more good goalkeeping as well, especially in the Newcastle-Sheffield United game. Claudia Moan for Newcastle did really well to keep their clean sheet. Sheffield did have at least one good chance. I've again, unfortunately, only seen the highlights because of being at the Arsenal game, but same can be said for her opposite number as well. Sian Rogers did well for Sheffield to stop Newcastle from kind of taking that lead even further. All of the home sides won except for Southampton, who will be really, really disappointed to have lost to Blackburn. Yeah, not great for them, especially having been on such a good run so far. Yeah, so they'll definitely be looking at kind of what went wrong there, but good for Blackburn, obviously, for them to have picked up those points. London City Lionesses 2, Bristol City 1. London City Lionesses, obviously, we know what their goals are. We know what they want to do. So for them to beat Bristol City, who spent a season in the WSL and obviously just came back down, is probably quite a big statement from them. I don't think Bristol City have looked particularly poor, though, by any means. Birmingham City 4, Portsmouth not managing to get a goal there. It's difficult with Portsmouth. I'm hopeful that things will improve, but I do just think it's really hard. They are a new side, and the other side that's come up to this league is Newcastle. And to draw a comparison between Newcastle and Portsmouth, when you look at the journey of the 2 clubs and the wider picture at the new clubs, is probably a bit naive. And yeah, Charlton are just flying really. Durham aren't an easy team to face ever, I don't think, regardless of what kind of run they're on, or any other circumstances. They just have this grit about them. But for Charlton to get another win there, stay up at the top, is a real indicator of how I think the rest of their season will go. They're playing really good football. They're exciting. They came so close last season, so they're so hungry for it. I think there's others that will definitely compete with them. But Charlton are going to be a really tough one for anybody to take points off of, I think.
Yeah, definitely looking good, Charlton there. Sipaway saying, is Portsmouth a newly promoted team? Yes, them and Newcastle are the two teams that came up this season. There we go. Thank you very much, Beth. That was excellent. That's our roving reporter there, Beth McCowan, on the Championship. Now we're going to move back to our other three again to have a little chat about a little thing that we call the UWCL, which stands for UEFA Women's Champions League, if you are new around these parts. But some really interesting second legs coming up as we get ourselves ready for the group stage. Juventus looking in good position at the moment. Roma looking okay as well, but both of those games could well be turned around. Man City looking home and hosed against Paris FC. Celtic with a cheeky little win as well the other day, which is quite good. And Arsenal currently 1 down against Hacken with a big game to come up. So I'm just literally going to follow around from each other, but just your general thoughts on how the Champions League has gone so far and any highlights or lowlights, if they were what you wanted to talk about for the round so far. And we will start with you, Laura.
Yeah, I think the most obvious one, obviously, from a kind of WSL perspective is the Arsenal game. City basically through at this point. It's going to take something incredibly special from Paris FC to win that one at the Joy Stadium come Thursday. But I think, I'm sure we'll get on to Celtic as well. But I think for Arsenal, it's very much, I think it'll be a really tough game, to be honest. Hacken are very strong and good defensively, and I think they've shown that in the past in the Champions League last year, in terms of how they set up at the back, that they can be quite hard to break down. And I think this will be a really, really interesting test of how well Arsenal can do that, because we saw them struggle against low blocks last season, and Hacken have obviously been reasonably successful with that in the past. So to have to overturn, like, it's not just 0-0, we need a goal, it's we have to overturn, or Arsenal have to overturn a 1-0 deficit now. But I do think you've got Meadow Park, it's an unreal atmosphere. So to carry that to home will be interesting. And I also think the 4G probably made a big difference to the kind of play, because I do think if you change what you play on, that's really tough. And I think that's potentially a little bit underestimated from that first leg. But yeah, absolutely will be a really interesting one, and another big game for Arsenal in the space of 2 weeks. So that'll be really interesting. But yeah, Celtic, big important win there, and I think it's a really interesting for Scottish football. They obviously beat Vorskla 1-0 in the second round on Sunday. So I think a big and interesting, exciting thing for Scottish football to see that result, and where, because we obviously had that show with about the Scottish League, so do go and check that out if you've not already, because that was an excellent show. And I think it goes to show that there are different leagues that are competing now, and that's a really exciting thing for women's football overall. And there are plenty of other results to talk about as well, but I will end my little chat there.
Connor, it's your go, mate.
Sorry about that. I was literally just checking something while you said that. I'm glad you mentioned Celtic, because if there's one team I'm rooting to get to the Champions League knockout group stages, it's Celtic. One reason only. I feel like it will do incredible things to put a spotlight on their fans. For those of you who will have seen their fan base and the way that they travel, similar reason to why I want Hammarby in there as well, actually, because those two clubs, when you look at what they bring to the game as well, I think will be massively beneficial, especially from a Celtic point of view at Celtic Park, that end, forgive me, Celtic fans, I don't know what it's called, where they have all the fans there with the drums and the big flags and, the flares and whatever else they've got in that end. It looks incredible and sounds incredible. So I would love to see Celtic in there for the same reason I want Hammarby in there for that very reason. I think it will be very good for the Champions League to have those sides in there. Juventus PSG is interesting. Without sounding a bit bitter and silently laughing, Mary Up said that she went to PSG to go on to win trophies and to play in the Champions League. How ironic would that be if they don't even make it into the group stages?
Very messy Russo.
Yes, on that one. So that's a second leg to keep an eye on because I find that a little bit amusing. I can't lie. Do I think Juventus will hold it? I don't know, to be honest. I really don't know how that side's going to go. City are already through. As I said, they'll probably rotate a little bit because they're 5-0 up. They're not going to give that away. Wolfsburg the same. They're not giving away a 7-goal margin. They'll be fine. So that kind of just leaves me with Arsenal because I don't really have too much to say on the other teams. I don't know. I mean, I still think Arsenal will win. I still think Arsenal will get the job done at home and be fine. But it's just a situation they didn't need to be in because now they know they've got to go strong in this one, whereas City can rotate and rest a few. Arsenal can't. They've got to go strong in order to win and to go through. So I really can't call it. Like I said, I do think Hacken are a decent side. Arsenal should get it done. They should. If they don't, someone just mentioned Jonas in the chat. If Arsenal don't make the group stage, like if they don't win this or get through the tie, I do think the fan base will turn very, very quick. I think I say before, United and Arsenal fans are very similar in the respect of that. I think it's almost like on a knife edge already. It's like waiting for one bad result and the fan base is going to turn straight away. So yeah, I don't know. I do think Arsenal get through, but I don't know. It's just going to be tight for them, isn't it? It's like I said, they're in a position they didn't need to be in that respect. So, yeah, that's certainly the game I'm going to be watching.
Where did your go?
I think you guys have covered everything really well there. In terms of Arsenal, I think it's definitely important, not just because of the qualification itself, but as you touched on, mounting pressure, maybe. But I think it's really important not to underestimate Häcken. They're a really, really, really good side. Saying that, I do think that playing at Meadow Park, even obviously there's conversation to be had about coming off the back of the City game. That could work in Arsenal's favour if they can start with some momentum and get a goal in, not even necessarily early in the first half. Then I feel like once that happens, the goals can sometimes keep coming. I'm not saying they're going to win by any huge margin against this team, but I think if they can show a good account of themselves up front, then I think they'll be okay. But if we do see a lot more of those wasted chances, any hesitancy, then they could have a real problem there. So we'll see what happens. City are obviously going in very comfortably, so we'll wait and see how Gareth Taylor chooses to line up. But yeah, it's really exciting seeing the progression of this whole crazy qualification stage, and then looking forward to what comes next, because there's so many exciting teams in the mix from all over the place. So yeah, just really looking forward to it all, but definitely a lot riding on this week for Arsenal.
Absolutely, 100%. So big things to be looking at. Mark Skinner's entered the chat. Is the qualification format going to change next season? We're losing competitive teams in round 2. Just look at last season. I'm joking, Mark. I'm joking. It's just a bit of levity. I go at the Arsenal fans in it one. Now I'm going to go to Man United. It's how it works. It's all 4, not just one. But genuinely, it's interesting. But are they that competitive if they're going out in this round? I would argue. Were they just going to get battered in the next bit anyway? Who knows? Gets the eyes on the prize really quickly, doesn't it? And another point that was made here, is there parachute payments relegated WSL sides once they go into the Championship? I don't believe there are. Anyone able to add anything extra there? But I'm not convinced. They might start getting them now that we've got, a company that's looking after both the WSL and the Championship. And yes, I see you. And yes, TJ, I did. It was a good joke. I think everybody said it was a good joke because Connor laughed and hit his face. So there we go. What a day. What a time to be alive. I'm absolutely shattered. I've literally been on here now for 2 hours and 48 minutes. And I'm about ready for bed. And I'm sure you lot are too. But just before we do, we've got to say a massive thank you to a superb panel. Beth, if people wanted to hear more of your random musings, whereabouts could they find these?
Thank you so much for having me. You can find me on Twitter at Beth R. McCowan. Otherwise, my writing will mostly be on the Halfway Line and also her Football Hub.
The Halfway Line is a place you can go and watch stuff. It's not like physically, don't go to your local place and sit on the Halfway Line. She won't be there. That's not an actual place. Connor, whereabouts can people go to find your random musings if they weren't here earlier on when I shouted that out?
Yeah, I've actually got something different to shout out. That's a brand that's not my own now. It's quite good, this, isn't it? The main ones are obviously liking this video and subscribing if you haven't already for this channel. I'm actually now writing for the Cutback, which is something that Flo has set up with a couple of writers. It's diving more into the tactical and analyst side of the game. I believe, if that's the Shane Thomas, I believe it is in the chat. He has also read my most recent one and left a nice comment on there as well when we were chatting a little bit about that. So that's the aim of it. There's a few pieces on Chelsea and City, and Flo's done a piece today diving into specifics of the opening weekend of the WSL. There's some Spurs and Arsenal stuff on there as well. So if you're interested in a bit more of that, a bit more of a deep dive into the tactical side of the game, that's what that's for. But the more important thing is this channel and following all the socials on here, because there's lots. Yes, I thought it was. Was Shane, appreciate that. Yes, this is the main place to be for all that kind of stuff.
Shane, I should imagine your payment is in the post, son. And Laura, if people wanted to find out more about your wonderful work, where would they go to see some more of you?
Yeah, so probably just follow my Twitter at Laura_Howard. I'm writing for She's a Baller, so that's a piece a week. Probably looking at kind of doing stuff that's a bit different to mainstream, looking a bit more at the culture of women's football and different elements to that. There's certainly going to be a piece about more cultural aspects this week, but hopefully that will vary and maybe something about kind of Project ACL and the work going on there in the future. And also the kids were all right. If you're into a bit of women's football history, that first episode is out tomorrow. So do go and give that a follow over on Twitter. That I'm hoping first episode, I'll give an exclusive here, is with Kerry Davis, who's the first black women's player to play for England. So that will be a really interesting episode, and that was super to be able to speak to her. So do go and give that a follow. But most importantly, Sean is coming on this channel on Friday to talk all about the Welsh leagues. So keep an eye out for that. He is indeed. That is all about the Adram Premier League and Welsh women's football. So that will be super exciting. So keep an eye out on the All for Wofo channels as well.
I can't wait for that. That's going to be amazing. Oh, I love it when Sean comes on. And I'm not going to be on with that one, as far as I'm aware anyway, unless I get a last minute call up. So I can just watch that. And it could be me going in the chat to wind up Sean for once. So that should be fun. I already knew I'm in the chat, just so you know. But it's good stuff. It's all TV. Thank you very much. Honestly, it's been a pleasure. Remember, if you get the opportunity, please go onto Twitter and tell everybody that you are voting for us in the FCAs. You could also do that in a variety of other ways. You could go onto Instagram on the FCAs and do the same thing. You could go onto their website and do the same thing. I suppose if you really wanted to, you could go and do that for the Halfway Line as well. The most important thing is, as they say in America, just go and vote, because I'll tell you something, there's 12 people in there that are absolutely busting their backsides to get some information out there for you to make women's football even bigger and even better than it already is. And my God, if that's not a reason to go and follow people and give them a little clap, then I don't know what is. We'll see you on Wednesday for Lower League Lingo, episode 6. How have we got that far? Nobody knows. See you next time. Goodbye.